There's been another major advancement in the revitalization of downtown Las Cruces. Visitors to Plaza de Las Cruces can now access free Wi-Fi. That and more in this edition of ASTA. Hello and welcome. I'm Udelvy Hill. Here to tell us more about free Wi-Fi and other developments taking place downtown is Mandy Gus, the city's Economic Development Administrator with the Economic Development Department. Mandy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, how does free Wi-Fi benefit downtown?
Well, as you may know, the City Council put together their strategic plan a couple years ago, and one of the things that they wanted to accomplish was more activity in downtown. And so they had a couple of things that talked about downtown, such as more events, more businesses, and then also this free Wi-Fi on the plaza. And the idea of the free Wi-Fi is that we get people to downtown, but then they stay. They linger. They hang out on the splash pad. They look on their Facebook. They check their Instagram. It also helps make our events, not just our events, but also community events, more socially interactive. So as some events have their own hashtags, such as the Salsa Fest, the Chili Drop. I know the city's Christmas tree lighting had its own hashtag, so people can hashtag and upload it right away, and then hopefully it encourages even more people to come and participate.
Oh, great. Well, that's a great benefit to downtown, and sure it's going to prove beneficial, like you said, with so many people going down there. And the goal really is to get them to stay a little longer and take advantage of everything downtown has to offer, which leads me to the next question. We're seeing new businesses open up in downtown Las Cruces. What types of business latest ones have we seen?
Well, actually, we're really excited about the revitalization of downtown. It's really a catalytic year for new businesses. We have several, and I'm sure I'll leave someone out, but recently we had the Main Street Vintage Mercado opened. They've got antiques, they've got ice creams, they've got coffee, and they just started serving food in the last couple of weeks. We recently had Rad Retrocade open, which is a bar and arcade, and it's got a cool retro feel, and they've got video games that you can play. I know they have a basketball, they have ice cream sundaes, kind of a little bit of everything. Last fall we had Zia Comics open, which was really fun. They bring a whole new audience to downtown, a younger crowd that comes down, plays games, involved in the comics. About a year ago, the Cities Project, the Amador project was opened. And we have our new Visit Las Cruces office there, and we own the building, but there's actually restaurants in there as well that are privately run that recently opened. So what we're seeing is a lot of new restaurants. What we'll be looking forward to bringing in is more retail. Again, we want a place where people can walk down Main Street, walk down and enjoy the atmosphere, and really mingle and stay a while and enjoy the heart of Las Cruces.
And you raise a good point, because downtown really is from the roundabout at the north end of Main Street, goes all the way down to Amador, and in that entire stretch you can pretty much find something of interest to you in that whole. How long is that? Is that like a mile or what?
It's about 7 blocks. I don't know the distance, but it only takes you about 10 to 12 minutes to walk from the roundabout to Amador. And
there's lots to see, and there's and people sometimes just identify downtown as around Plaza de Las Cruces, that little strip, but it also goes beyond, right? Because you have Water Street and you have Campo Street, and you even have some businesses on Campo Street, kind of adjacent or catty corner from the post office. So little by little, I guess we're expanding out, and downtown is getting a little larger.
And one of the things in downtown, there's several different districts and boundaries, but is the Arts and Cultural District, and that includes not only Main Street and some of the things there, but it goes into the Mesquite District. So like you said, going into Campo and some of the galleries. And there's a lot of folks on Mesquite Street that are participating in First Friday Art Ramble. And so on the first Friday of every month from 5 to 7, you can go downtown and go through the different galleries as they have different openings and see what they've got.
Yeah, that's a nice touch. And you touched on the Mesquite Historic District a little bit, and we have Klein Park there. And so that's a popular place for for people to gather. And we're seeing more activities happening there as well.
Yes, we are, and hopefully Climb Park will be the next place where they put in free Wi-Fi. So again, it's about community building, and that's the goal of meeting the goals of City Council strategic plans.
Oh, wonderful. So what are some of the advantages to locating a business downtown?
So in downtown, there's a couple of advantages. First off, it's a growing area. It's an area of focus for the city. There's also some additional support in we work with our nonprofit partners, Downtown Las Cruces Partnership, and they're doing a lot of work with technical assistance. They get assistance from New Mexico Main Street, and really doing a lot of things to help create the business community. There's also some specific incentives for downtown, one of which is Renovate Main Street. And so that's another way that the city can help support businesses that want to grow or locate into downtown.
And tell us a little bit more about that. There's a financial incentive for businesses that want to maybe change the look or make an improvement to the building.
That's correct. So we have a downtown master plan, which kind of outlines the types of businesses we're trying to bring in. And really our focus is retail, restaurant, and entertainment. So if there's a business that is retail, restaurant, or entertainment, they can qualify for the Renovate Main Street grant, which is it's a matching grant from the city. For every dollar the business puts in, the city will put in $1 to help them upgrade facades, upgrade infrastructure, help them change the interior. It has to be infrastructure, and actually the city doesn't pay the business, but we pay the contractor who does the work. So it's really important that we have to have a contract up front, so we have to have it signed before they start any of the work. But there's been a couple businesses downtown that have taken advantage of it, including Little Toad Creek. They completely renovated that building to make it into the brewery that it is now. The same with Zia Comics. There's a restaurant called Mama Bees, which recently opened, and Rad Retrocade have already taken advantage. We still have money in the budget, so we encourage folks, even if they're not sure if they qualify, to call our team or reach out to us so that we can talk about it and see how we can help them make it their dream a reality.
Wow, that's a wonderful incentive to try to get more businesses downtown and the ones that are already there to make improvements to their existing building.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so downtown Las Cruces is a TID, which is a tax increment development district.
Correct.
How exactly does that work?
So the way that a TID works is there is a designated boundary, and all of the businesses in that boundary, when they pay GRT, instead of paying into the city of Las Cruces GRT, they pay into the TID, which is it's the equivalent of sales tax GRT. And so they pay into the TID, and then so the TID was created in 2009, and that year they set a baseline. So the amount of money that was being made in tax revenue in that year continues to come back to the city. But the increment, that's where the tax increment part comes. As we develop the district, it goes more and more. The increment goes back into investment in that specific area. So as there's a focus in revitalizing downtown, as there's more activity, as there's more spending, there's more tax increment, we use those funds to pay for major projects and infrastructure projects in downtown. And so a couple of examples of things that we have done and things we've used TID funding for is we built the plaza with TID funding. We did the church water two-way conversion with TID funding, along with some other funds with utilities and public works, but it was a big portion of the funding. And then we built that Amador Plaza and the new home of Visit Las Cruces. And then there's a TID board, which is also it's the same folks that are on city council, and they set priorities for the future on what our projects will be. And so some of the projects they've identified as for TID funding to pay for in the future are redoing Compost Street, making it more pedestrian friendly, building new bathrooms and recreating one of the parking lot behind the Rio Grande Theater. We need bathrooms that are more easily accessible, better lit, in a good place for people to use. And then rehabbing the Amador Hotel and eventually building a parking garage.
Well, all good causes for tax money to go to.
Right, right.
So, what is the possibility of doing TIDs in other parts of town? I know City Council recently talked about possibly the El Paseo corridor, maybe even Solano, Idaho area.
So we're looking at, actually right now, the TID that was done downtown was completely driven by the city. So it was all public infrastructure, all public driven projects. The way that we can use TIDs is similar to Albuquerque, has using them in ways to help incentivize private development. So if there's an underdeveloped area, we can use a TID as they develop it to pay for the public infrastructure. Again, the money always goes to public infrastructure. But we're working through in the Economic Development Department right now, creating some policies that will have to be adopted by council so that we can make that available and hopefully use it as a way to revitalize some other areas. One of the areas we're looking at is like the Apodaca Blueprint area, and maybe the West Mesa and the airport area. So we really want to see how we can use those as tools to help grow our community and make it a better place for all of us.
Wow, always looking ahead. That's great. Economic Development Department. Very good. Okay, so a little while ago you touched on the two-way street conversion that took place downtown. How's that working out? And what was the basis of it in the first place?
So the church water as you may remember, it used to be one-way streets, and we called it the racetrack around Las Cruces, or around downtown. And so it really was a place that people could drive through, and we want to make downtown a place you drive to.
Very good.
So some of the background on the two-way conversion, the reason we made it two-way streets is they're safer. People tend to drive slower on two-way streets than they do on one-way streets. If you accidentally missed the store you wanted to go into, you don't have to drive all the way back around. You can more easily get to it. It was designed with more on-street parking. We changed some of the parking from regular parallel parking to reverse parking, which sounds really scary when you first think about it. But what I tell everyone is that reverse diagonal parking is actually easier than parallel parking, because when you're parallel parking, you reverse into the spot and then straighten it up. You don't have to straighten it up, you just reverse in.
And it seems to be working out. I mean, if you go through downtown, at first I thought, well, I wonder how this is going to work out. But I'm seeing people are taking advantage of it.
And we worked with our codes enforcement, so we had kind of a learning period where folks, if they park the wrong way, we put a little reminder like, "Oops, we parked the wrong way." I think now they're starting to give citations for it, but we wanted to make sure there was enough of an education period for people to realize like, "Oh, I have to park backwards here. It's a little bit different. We've got to learn something new." But what we're seeing overall, the church water project took 2 years for us to get done. And we worked really closely with the businesses downtown, with Downtown Las Cruces Partnership, trying to keep everyone informed. We broke up the project into small pieces so that it would not affect all of downtown at once, but instead we had 4 different zones. We tried not to completely close any streets, but instead keep it to 1 lane. Again, we were trying to be very mindful of business access and very mindful of this project. Everyone knew that the end result would be good for downtown, but getting through that process was going to be a little bit painful. So we did what we could to make it at the least amount of pain as possible.
And we do want to thank and compliment the businesses downtown because they were patient and they were good about it. As you say, there were growing pains in the middle, but they all recognized the benefit at the end. So we want to thank them for being so gracious about the whole thing.
And also our Public Works Department. Our Public Works Department did a great job keeping us involved as well as the businesses. And Public Works does construction projects all the time, but I don't always understand what that means or what something happened, and they were great at taking the time to educate both me and the businesses so we understood why there was a delay or why what we originally planned had to change a little bit. So we were very lucky to have a great teamwork in our Public Works Department as well.
And you raise a good point because communication is very important. And one of the things we've learned dealing with the public is pretty much they're okay with things we do as long as we give them notice, as long as we
Right.
keep them informed throughout the whole process. And as you point out, that took place in this instance, and so it worked out pretty well for everybody, I guess.
And we're hoping that we can use that for future projects. Like we know we've talked about redoing Compost Street. So how do we continue then to work with the businesses on Compost Street and the stakeholders to keep them involved? It wasn't perfect by any means. We had some lessons learned, but how do we take those now and make the next project successful as well?
Great, great. So let's talk a little bit more about parking downtown. So there's some businesses that say we need more. There's a school of thought that says we have plenty. There's talk of potentially a parking garage, a structure downtown, and maybe even parking meters. So that's kind of a lot, but
Yep.
kind of tell us how all that's shaken out.
So we have a downtown parking committee right now, which actually has an opening. So if people are interested in serving on that committee, they can reach out to us or reach out to the city clerk's office and make an application for that. But the downtown parking committee looks at several issues. We had a parking study done several years ago that talked about how to implement parking management in downtown. Right now, there is a lot of open, free public parking in downtown. There's approximately 2,000 spaces.
Wow.
And that includes City Hall and the library, so if we're including that as part of our downtown area. But with those open, free spaces, they're behind the businesses. So if you're on Main Street, you have the front doors, but the parking is behind the businesses, and we tend to think, well, that's too far away. It's just not how we're used to thinking about parking. So a little bit of it is a perception, but also ultimately our vision for downtown is developing those parking lots into residential and commercial areas. And so some of that parking will start to go away. And what we don't want to happen is people not to have somewhere to park. So the parking committee is looking at how do we start getting people used to what's coming in parking. And one of the things that was recently passed at council is that we will be implementing 2-hour time limited parking on Main Street, and then probably the rest of downtown. That will be for on-street parking only, so that some of it's parallel parking, some of it's that reverse diagonal parking will have a time limit for 2 hours. It's still free, but you'll just have to, in 2 hours, go out and move. The idea is we want those businesses to have that turnover. We don't want employees to park right in front of a business all day and then the customers can't get to them. So we want that turnover in, so you, as a customer, you can get to the business that you're trying to go to. After timed parking, depending on how the lots develop, we'll be looking at potentially implementing paid parking eventually, and then a parking garage. We know that the parking garage isn't necessarily ready for us to build it today, but we're trying again to look ahead. And so we actually received some capital outlay money from the state this year, and we will be looking at design for a parking garage, looking at feasibility and locations for the best place to put those. Again, we know our downtown's not quite there, but as we're going through this revitalization process, we want to be prepared for as those steps come so we're not behind the curve.
Wonderful. And when you talk about free parking spaces, you mentioned City Hall, Browning, and Library, and then just directly across the street from both is the District Court, and there's
Correct.
lots of free parking there as well.
Correct.
I think one of the things that we need to kind of impart to people when you say maybe changing some mindsets is, you're not always going to be able to park right in front of the venue you want to go to, so it may take you a little bit of a walk,
Right.
but there is lots of free parking out there.
And it's funny because on a normal day-to-day, sometimes we hear complaints about parking, but when we have a big event like the Christmas tree lighting, there's a couple thousand people downtown, and people don't complain about it because they're used to in events having to park further away and walk to it. So it's just about what we're used to and changing our mindset and understanding how we can all take advantage of the downtown revitalization. So I think we're all kind of learning as we grow into really the downtown being the heart of the city. We're all learning what that change means for us and our community.
Great, great. And then just one last point, and this is something that recently came to my attention, having to do with parking downtown, is folks who leave their cars overnight. This is especially Friday night into Saturday because we have the farmers market, and so some people will leave their cars parked on Main Street, go home, and then with the plan of coming back the next day to get it. Well, they start farmers market early. By 6 in the morning,
Right.
all vehicles have to be moved. So just a point to everybody out there, don't park your car on Main Street Friday into Saturday because you risk getting it towed if you don't
Right.
move it early enough.
But we do want people to make the right choice. So there's plenty of surface parking on the outside. Again,
Right.
they'll use those lots. If you're going to leave your car overnight, instead of parking on Main Street, use the lots on Church and Water.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Well, you've brought us up to date on downtown. You've given us some insight into how downtown is going to continue to progress, and there's a lot of great stuff on the horizon.
A lot of activity
A lot
going
of
on.
activity. So, and kudos to you and your team in the Economic Development Office because you're the folks who are really helping drive all of this.
Thank
and
you.
It's your insight, and thank you very much for doing that. And thank you, Mandy Gus, for
Thank you
joining
very
us
much.
on ASCTA. You are the Business Development Administrator for the city. You're doing a great job, and thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me.